Now to the war in Ukraine. Nukes are in the picture again. A Ukrainian drone has been shot down south of Moscow, that's deep inside Russian territory, and Kiev wants the United Nations to intervene. Not sure how it will help, but let's bring you up to speed with the developments one by one, starting with Russia's big announcement. It is planning to station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Russian President Vladimir Putin made this announcement on Saturday, and it's got Ukraine scrambling. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry has asked for an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council. It is asking the world to counter what it calls Russia's nuclear blackmail. I've got the statement from Ukraine with me. This is what it says. Ukraine expects effective measures to counter the Kremlin's nuclear blackmail by the United Kingdom, China, the USA and France in particular as permanent members of the UN Security Council. We demand to immediately convene an extraordinary meeting of the United Nations Security Council for this purpose. If the meeting is called, what will it yield? Nothing more than dramatic sound bites. Remember, Russia too is a permanent member of the Security Council. It has a veto power. So does China. So there won't be a resolution. At best, Ukraine can hope for a public rebuke of Russia. And Putin has already offered a justification. Here's why he says he's placing nukes in Belarus.
Belarusian President Alexander Grigorievich Lukashenko has long raised the question of deploying Russian tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. There is nothing unusual here either. First, the United States has been doing this for decades. They have long placed their tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of the allied countries, NATO countries in Europe. We agreed that we would do the same without violating our obligations. I'd like to emphasize this, without violating our international obligations on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. We do not transfer nuclear weapons, and the United States does not transfer nuclear weapons to its allies. We are doing what they have been doing for decades, stationing them in certain allied countries, preparing the launch platforms and training their crews. We are going to do the same thing. This is exactly what Alexander Grigorievich Lukashenko asked for.
Putin may have a valid point. For years, Russia has proudly stated that it does not go around placing nuclear weapons in allied nations. That's not something that the US can boast of. And now the change in Russia's policy may be hypocritical, but it has a precedent set by the US. How can Washington condemn something that it itself is guilty of? Well, it can, because it's Washington, and it has. NATO has called the plan, quote-unquote, dangerous and irresponsible. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell has threatened new sanctions on Russia and Belarus. And America's national security spokesperson John Kirby has said this.
I can tell you that we've seen nothing that would indicate Mr. Putin is preparing to use tactical nuclear weapons in any way whatsoever in Ukraine. And I can also tell you that we haven't seen anything that would cause us to change our own strategic nuclear deterrent posture.
Perhaps the US knows it can't do much about Russia's plan without curbing its own activities. And perhaps Ukraine knows that Security Council intervention will be a non-starter. So it is directly appealing to the people of Belarus. Here's a statement from Ukraine's Foreign Ministry, and I quote, Ukraine appeals to Belarusian society to prevent the fulfillment of the criminal purposes regarding the deployment of nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus, which will further turn this country into a hostage of the Kremlin. Quick fact. Belarus borders both Ukraine and Russia. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko is a close ally of Vladimir Putin. He is unlikely to allow Belarusian society to get in the way of Russia's nuclear plan. And what exactly is that plan? Putin wants to station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. What are those? There are two classifications of nuclear weapons, tactical and strategic. Tactical nukes are smaller. They're considered less dangerous than the larger, deadlier strategic nuclear weapons. And they can be used on the battlefield without obliterating everything. In contrast, strategic nukes are the ones used to level entire cities. You know, like the ones that the US dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during the Second World War. Those were strategic nuclear weapons. Tactical nukes are smaller. They can be used in a more limited capacity. So their impact is small. But that doesn't change the fact that they're still nuclear weapons. They're devastating. And placing them in Belarus would be an escalation by Russia. It would be a warning to Ukraine and its Western allies, telling them not to push Russia any further. This escalation comes amid news of another raging battle in the war in Ukraine, the battle for Avdiivka. It's a small city near Donetsk in eastern Ukraine. Last week, Ukraine said it could become a second Bakhmut. Because like with Bakhmut, Russia has been trying to capture Avdiivka by bombing it into submission. Over the weekend, it was on the receiving end of intense shelling. Officials say it's becoming more and more like a place from post-apocalyptic movies, which begs the question, what's the reason behind this sort of devastation? Could Russian bombardment be a retaliation for something? On Sunday, videos like this emerged from a town 220 kilometers south of Moscow. This is deep into Russian territory, some 300 kilometers from Ukraine. This is where a drone crashed. Russia says it was a Ukrainian drone. It lost control and crashed into the town. 3 people were reportedly injured. Remember, Ukraine has always denied allegations that its drones have flown into Russian territory. It has never claimed official responsibility for attacks within Russian borders. But these attacks have been happening off and on, like last week's attack on a Russian base in Crimea. Could Russia be frustrated with these guerrilla-style attacks? Is it reacting by flattening Avdiivka and placing nukes in Belarus? Whatever the reason, the war shows no signs of slowing down, and the world will continue to suffer till a solution is found.